Turkey is a home cook's nemesis. It almost always ends up dry. And if you're cooking a turkey, you're probably feeding a bunch of people, maybe even for a special occasion. So there's tons of pressure to get it right. The advice you'll hear is to brine the thing. In fact, it seems like people recommend brining most lean meats most of the time. But what's actually going on when you brine meat? And how does it help you get the results you want? This is Minute Food. First, why does meat in general, and specifically turkey, dry out when you cook it? Meat actually starts out really wet. Raw turkey, for instance, is more than 60% water. Most of that moisture is held between tiny filaments of protein deep inside muscle fibers. When you add heat to meat, those filaments start shortening and contracting, squeezing out some of the water. The more heat you add, the tighter these filaments squeeze and the more water you lose. Since poultry in particular needs to be cooked to pretty high temperatures, by the time you've finished cooking your turkey, you've squeezed out somewhere around a quarter of the water inside. Even more if you happen to overcook it. To limit that moisture loss, you need to change how those filaments interact with water. Enter salt. When you add salt to water, the sodium and chloride separate into ions. And when you add meat to that salty water, the ions diffuse from the water, where they're super concentrated, into the meat. There, the positively charged sodium ions just kind of hang out, but the negatively charged chloride ions get busy. First, they start glomming onto positively charged areas on the filaments. As the negative charges build up, neighboring filaments begin to repel each other, creating extra space for water to accumulate between them. The chloride ions also disrupt the bonds that hold the different types of filaments together, allowing the water-holding spaces between them to swell even more. Finally, the ions mess with bonds holding the filaments themselves together, basically dissolving them into a network of proteins that weaves through and binds to all the stored-up water. Thanks to the effects of salt, when brined meat eventually meets up with heat, it can hold on to all this bound-up water instead of squeezing it out. Brining can cut moisture loss during cooking by as much as 40%. And 40% more moisture can produce a pretty juicy bird. So here's tip number 1. If moisture is your main goal, brine your turkey. There's no better way to accumulate and hold on to water. But here's tip 2. If flavor is what really gets your juices going, consider what's called a dry brine. See, meat sitting in a brine will soak up some of the water. That helps make it super moist, but it can also end up diluting the flavor. An alternative is to just rub the meat with plenty of salt and let it sit. Basically, the same stuff happens. The salt breaks into ions, which diffuse into the meat and make the filaments better at holding onto water. But since you aren't adding water, they're just holding onto the moisture that the meat naturally contains. So a turkey that's dry brined won't be quite as juicy as a wet brined bird, but it'll probably taste turkeyier. Turkey-ear? Anyway, tip 3, read the label. Stores also sell meat, especially turkey, that has been basically pre-brined. That's what's going on when you see labels like these. These turkeys are definitely convenient since you don't have to mess with brining them yourself, but you also don't get to control what's in them. These products often contain not just salt, but also other stuff like phosphates or additional proteins that help the meat hold on to even more moisture. If you do use one of these turkeys, don't brine it again at home. It could end up super salty. And tip 4, no matter what the internet seems to say, you don't have to brine your bird. It adds some work, plus tweaking protein structure can change meat's texture. While some people love brined meat, others don't. If you do decide to go brineless, cook your turkey at a nice low heat, and be super careful not to overcook it since it'll be more prone to drying out. For specific info about how to build a brine or how long to brine, we've linked to some great resources in the description. And for a step-by-step guide, check out this awesome turkey tutorial from the Culinary Institute of America. But even simply knowing what's going on when you brine meat, or when someone else does, is a great jumping-off point for beginning briners, and can help been there, done that briners refine their strategy. Plus, all this nerdy knowledge can provide some great dinner time conversation while you gobble up the end result.